Hi, my name is Wyatt Dawson, and I'm 35 years old. If you ask me about my journey, I'd tell you it really began during those sun-drenched summers in Norfolk, Virginia, right by my grandfather's side. He was the man who truly shaped who I am today. I'm not just the founder of the Arthur's Legacy steakhouse chain. I also carry a powerful flame within me, a legacy left by my grandfather, Arthur Dawson, instilled not just through blood, but through lessons deeply etched into my heart. I grew up in a small town where the salty air of the Chesapeake Bay blended perfectly with the smoky scent from the wood-fired grill at the Dawson Grill and Oyster Bar. This was our family restaurant, built from the ground up by my grandfather. It was my true home, filled with childhood memories of wandering everywhere with him. From tree-lined streets to bustling farmers markets, every single morning, even before the sun had fully risen, I'd be in the back of his old pickup truck, listening to classic tunes crackle on the radio. He'd hum along, his voice warm and deep, and I, just a little kid, would sit there, eyes wide with pure admiration, looking at him like he was my personal hero. My grandfather, Arthur, wasn't one to brag. He was tall, with silver hair, but his deep blue eyes always gleamed with quiet determination. He once told me, "Wyatt, business isn't just about making money. It's about how you treat everyone around you, from the farmer who grows your vegetables to the customer sitting at your table. Reputation is something money can't buy, and once it's gone, you can never get it back." I was too young to fully understand those words then, but they settled in my heart like seeds, waiting to sprout. During those summer days, I'd always tag along with him to the farmer's market. He never bought ingredients from big suppliers. "They only care about money, Wyatt," he'd say. But these farmers, they pour their sweat into every vegetable, every fish. They deserve respect. I can still picture him standing in the sunlight, wearing a faded plaid shirt, shaking hands with each farmer, asking about their crops and their families. I remember one time a farmer named Joe, who grew the sweetest sweet potatoes around, shared that his entire harvest had been ruined by floods. Without a second thought, my grandfather bought his entire remaining stock, even though he knew the restaurant couldn't possibly use it all. "Sometimes, Wyatt, helping others is helping yourself," he'd say, patting my shoulder. I loved those mornings. They weren't just market trips. They were living lessons. He taught me how to pick perfectly ripe tomatoes, how to smell fresh fish to know it was just caught, and how to look into a seller's eyes to see their sincerity. "Look them in the eye, Wyatt," he'd advise. "If they can't meet your gaze, don't trust them." I'd nod, only half understanding. But mostly I was just thrilled to be on an adventure with my hero. His restaurant, the Dawson Grill and Oyster Bar, was truly the heart of our family. It wasn't just how we earned a living. It was what brought everyone together. Customers didn't just come to eat. They came to chat, to share their everyday stories. Some had been dining there since the day it opened, affectionately calling him Art. I recall busy evenings when the restaurant was packed, buzzing with laughter and the clinking of cutlery. My grandfather was everywhere, pouring beer at the bar, checking ribs in the kitchen, or chatting with customers. I, an 8-year-old kid, would sit in the corner of the counter, sipping soda and watching him. I truly wanted to grow up and be just like him, strong, dependable, and beloved by all. But things weren't always easy. He told me about the tough early days. He opened the restaurant in the 70s during a difficult economic period, when no one believed a man without a college degree could succeed. He borrowed money from everyone he knew, working day and night, sometimes even sleeping on the kitchen floor to save time. "But Wyatt," he'd say, his eyes gleaming, "when you truly believe in what you do, when you pour your whole heart into it, nothing is impossible." His words made my heart race, as if he were passing his own fire directly to me.
These lessons
Weren't just words. I saw them in action. He treated his entire staff, from waiters to dishwashers, like family. One time an employee named Maria fell seriously ill and couldn't work for a month. He not only kept paying her salary, but also visited her in the hospital with a fruit basket and a handwritten card. When I asked him why, he simply said, "We're a family, and family doesn't abandon each other." Closer to my grandfather than anyone else in our family. My father, Frank, was always tied up with his own projects, rarely showing up at the restaurant. My twin brother, Blake, preferred playing over caring about the family business. So, I became my grandfather's shadow, following him everywhere, absorbing every single lesson. I remember when I was 12, he took me into the kitchen and taught me how to grill a perfect steak. "The fire has to be just right, Wyatt," he explained, adjusting the grill. "Too hot, it burns. Too cool, it's tough. Life's the same. You've got to find balance." I stood there, sweat beading on my forehead from the heat, but my heart swelled with immense pride. Those years passed like a beautiful dream. I grew up in his warm embrace, surrounded by the comforting smell of grilled meat and the gentle sounds of waves from the Chesapeake Bay. I thought it would always be this way, that the restaurant would forever be my sanctuary. My grandfather would always be there, guiding me. But life is never that simple. When I was 19, my grandfather passed away. It was a crisp fall morning, with golden leaves blanketing the road leading to the restaurant. He left peacefully in his sleep, leaving a gaping void that nothing could fill. I stood in front of the restaurant, staring at the sign bearing his name. The Dawson Grill and Oyster Bar, feeling like my entire world had collapsed. I didn't cry, not because I was strong, but because I simply didn't know what to do with such profound pain. I just stood there, clutching the restaurant key he'd given me, as if holding it tight could somehow keep him with me. After the funeral, my father, Frank, took over the restaurant. I genuinely hoped he'd continue my grandfather's legacy, preserving the values he had built, but I was terribly wrong. My father was nothing like him. He saw the restaurant as merely a money-making machine, not a cherished legacy. Within months, everything shifted. The trips to the farmers' market stopped. He started ordering frozen food from large suppliers, the very kind my grandfather never trusted. "It's more efficient, Wyatt," he'd say when I questioned him. "Need to scale up? Go bigger." I wanted to argue, to shout that my grandfather would never have agreed, but at 19 I was too young, too inexperienced to challenge him effectively. The days that followed felt like being trapped in a slow-motion nightmare. The Dawson Grill and Oyster Bar, once the vibrant heart of my world, became something utterly unrecognizable. My father now sat in a sleek new office with a polished wooden desk and revenue charts proudly displayed on the walls. He no longer poured beers at the bar or personally checked ribs in the kitchen, like my grandfather did. Instead, he made endless phone calls, held countless meetings, and signed contracts with suppliers I'd never heard of. "Frozen food from China, Wyatt," he'd boast smugly. "Cheaper, faster delivery, and customers won't even know the difference." I stood there, gripping the edge of the table, desperately trying to suppress my anger. I longed to shout that customers weren't fools, that they would absolutely notice the difference, and that my grandfather built this place on genuine sincerity, not cheap shortcuts. But I remained silent, knowing my father wouldn't listen.
Every
day, I watched my grandfather's legacy slowly being chipped away. The local farmers, who once shook hands with my grandfather each morning, stopped coming. Instead, cold delivery trucks would park behind the restaurant, unloading crates of frozen fish and prepackaged vegetables. From thousands of miles away, I remember opening one crate and seeing lifeless gray sardines with cloudy eyes, no trace of the freshness my grandfather always demanded. "This isn't what Grandpa would use," I muttered, but no one paid attention. Henry, the head chef who'd worked with my grandfather from the very beginning, just shook his head and sighed. "Times have changed, Wyatt," he said, but I could clearly see the disappointment in his eyes. Within 2 years of my father taking over, the restaurant's profits skyrocketed. He opened 3 new locations, one in Virginia Beach, one in Chesapeake, and one in Newport News. Local papers hailed it as a resounding success. My father appeared on magazine covers, grinning smugly in tailored suits, spouting grand pronouncements about his business vision. I read those articles, but every word felt like a sharp knife twisting inside me. Success. This wasn't my grandfather's kind of success. It felt like a profound betrayal. While my father reveled in his booming numbers, my twin brother Blake became his biggest fan. As twins, we shared the same dark brown hair and those distinctive Dawson blue eyes, but our spirits were worlds apart. While I grew up at my grandfather's side, learning to pick ripe tomatoes and grill a perfect steak, Blake was captivated by the same glitz and glamour that enthralled our father. Now, seeing Dad lavishly spend on luxuries, Blake absolutely idolized him. He was completely enamored with the new cars, the extravagant vacations, and the grand promises of a restaurant empire Dad painted. "Dad's a genius, Wyatt," Blake said one evening as we sat in the living room, watching Dad show off his new yacht. "Grandpa worked his whole life for one little place. Dad's taking us to the next level." I looked at Blake, desperate to explain. That Dad's next level was a castle built on sand that Grandpa didn't just build a restaurant, but a lasting legacy. But Blake just laughed, shaking his head as if I were a naive dreamer who simply didn't understand business. Blake didn't just support Dad, absolutely fawned over him. During family dinners, when my mother, Laura, would try to share stories about Grandpa to keep his memory alive, Blake would interrupt, gushing excitedly about Dad's ambitious expansion plans. "Dad says, we'll open a branch in Richmond, then D.C., he'd exclaim, his eyes gleaming with enthusiasm. "Don't you see, Wyatt? We're making history." I'd just nod, choking down my food, the words stuck in my throat. History, the history Grandpa built, was actively being erased, but Blake simply couldn't see it. He was mesmerized by the impressive revenue numbers, by Dad's spotlight, and by the praise from people who knew nothing about the restaurant's true intrinsic value. Meanwhile, my father grew increasingly arrogant, even started to belittle Grandpa, something I never thought he'd dare do. Arthur was a good man, but he was outdated, declared during one dinner when I hesitantly suggested returning to local farmers. "His time is over, Wyatt. If we stuck to his ways, we'd still be a small-time joint in Norfolk." Blake laughed loudly, nodding as if Dad had just delivered a profound truth. I sat there, my hands clenched under the table, feeling the blood rush to my face. Outdated, Grandpa built a place people truly loved, a place they called home. In Dad, he was turning it into a soulless machine, completely stripped of the warmth of those old days. Dad's arrogance wasn't limited to his words. Started spending lavishly as if the money would never run out. A sleek sports car suddenly appeared in front of the restaurant, quickly followed by a vacation home in the Outer Banks. "This is what we deserve, Wyatt," he'd say, clapping my shoulder as if I fully agreed, but I couldn't. Every dollar he spent felt like another deep stab at Grandpa's legacy. I remembered Grandpa's words clearly. "Do business with your heart. Wyatt, if you chase money alone, you'll lose everything." I wanted to scream that Dad was on the wrong path, that he was utterly destroying everything Grandpa spent his life building. But I didn't have the courage. I was just a kid, barely learning the ropes of business. Felt I had no power, no voice. During those days, I felt like a complete outsider in my own family. I remember going into the kitchen once, trying to help Henry prepare dishes, desperately trying to hold on to a sliver of the old days flavor. But the ingredients made me sick. The frozen steaks could never have the rich, sweet quality Grandpa took such pride in. One time, a regular customer, Margaret, who'd been coming since I was a kid, pulled me aside and asked, "Wyatt, why do the ribs taste different today? They're not like Arthur's." I could only apologize, feeling like I was betraying her, betraying Grandpa. I naively thought things might change once Blake and I graduated college. At 23, we returned to Norfolk, business administration degrees in hand. Ready to contribute to the Dawson Grill and Oyster Bar, I carried my grandfather's fire, a fierce conviction that I could steer the restaurant back to its true path, one of sincerity, fresh ingredients, and genuine relationships with local farmers. Blake, on the other hand, only wanted to chase our father's grand dream of expansion. He saw the new branches and escalating profit numbers as the undeniable future. I, however, saw a cherished legacy eroding day by day. On my first day at the family company, I immediately sensed an unfamiliar atmosphere. The main office in Norfolk now looked like a sleek corporate headquarters, complete with glass walls and glowing computer screens. My father sat at the head of the meeting table, dressed in a tailored suit, his gold watch gleaming, looking more like a wealthy tycoon than a seasoned restaurateur. Blake sat beside him, eagerly taking notes, nodding enthusiastically, as Dad outlined plans for a new branch in Baltimore. I sat at the far end of the table, clutching my grandfather's old notebook, filled with his cherished recipes and poignant reminders to do business with heart, I'd carefully prepared a plan, a clear vision to return the restaurant to its authentic roots. In that very first meeting, I mustered every ounce of my courage to speak. "We should go back to working with local farmers," I said, my voice trembling slightly but striving for confidence. "Clean, traceable ingredients will build a truly sustainable brand. Customers don't just want good food, they want to know exactly where it comes from." I glanced around the table, hoping for even a flicker of agreement. Instead, I was met with an awkward, uncomfortable silence. My father raised an eyebrow, a dismissive smirk curling on his face. "Wyatt," he said, his voice slow but as sharp, "as a blade, you've spent far too much time with your grandfather, haven't you? You're stuck in his old-fashioned, outdated ways." He paused, looking around the room as if addressing a large crowd. "His time is over. We can't run a business by shopping at farmers markets like housewives. We need scale, efficiency." A few employees chuckled, and I felt my face flush with heat. I wanted to stand up and yell that he was wrong, that he was destroying everything Grandpa built. Blake, as usual, didn't miss a beat. "You're such a dreamer, Wyatt," he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm and a mocking grin. "Clean food? Local farmers? What century do you think we're in? Business is about being practical, not spinning fairy tales about Grandpa." The room erupted in laughter, and I felt myself shrinking, small and utterly powerless. I stayed with the company, not because I truly wanted to, but because I felt I owed it to Grandpa. I simply couldn't let his legacy vanish entirely. In the months that followed, I kept offering ideas in meetings, though each one was swiftly shot down by Dad, or openly mocked by Blake. "Wyatt, you need to think bigger," Dad said in another meeting, when I suggested reducing our reliance on frozen ingredients. "You can't keep clinging to Grandpa's slow ideas. Look at the revenue. We're breaking records." Blake clapped as if Dad had uttered something truly profound, but all I saw was a runaway train speeding headlong toward a cliff. The tension wasn't confined to the boardroom. It seeped into our family dinners, those holidays that once brought us all together. One Sunday evening, as we gathered around the dinner table, Mom tried to share a story about the time Grandpa taught me to pick tomatoes at the farmer's market. "Wyatt was only 8, but he learned so fast," she said, her smile warm. I smiled back, feeling a faint flicker of those old days' warmth. But Blake cut in, as if Mom's story were an outright insult. "Mom, enough with those stories," he snapped, his voice clearly irritated. "We're talking about business, not fairy tales." My heart clenched and I stood up ready to argue back. Things only escalated from there. Dad immediately tore into me, and Blake eagerly joined in, declaring I wasn't worthy of the family legacy. My mother, Laura, was caught tragically in the middle, powerless. She desperately wanted the family to remain united, but she simply didn't know how. After those tense dinners, she'd often pull me aside, resting a comforting hand on my shoulder. "Wyatt, be patient with your father and brother," she'd whisper. "They just want what's best for the family." I looked into her eyes, seeing her profound desperation, and knew she was hurting as much as I was, but I couldn't be patient. Every single day, I felt like I was losing Grandpa all over again, and I couldn't bear it. I started spending more time in Grandpa's old office, rereading his notes, seeking strength from his timeless teachings. "Do business with your heart, Wyatt," he had written. I vowed to myself that I wouldn't give up. I'd stay. I'd fight to save his legacy, even if it meant confronting Dad and Blake Hedden. But deep down, I knew the road ahead would be treacherous. The family tension was mounting like a storm on the horizon, and I, a young man fresh out of college, wasn't sure if I had the strength to weather it. In the years that followed, I fiercely fought to hold on to my convictions. 2 years after graduating, I was still working at the Dawson Grill and Oyster Bar, though each day felt more like a pitched battle. I continued to voice my ideas in meetings, still trying to convince Dad to return to local farmers, but every attempt was dismissed by him or mocked by Blake. "Wyatt, you need to grow up," Dad said, his voice dripping with disdain. "Business isn't a child's game," Blake smirked, calling me a dreamer stuck in the past. I swallowed their bitter words, telling myself I was doing this for Grandpa, for the values he'd passed down. but deep down I was starting to feel utterly exhausted. I didn't know how much longer I could endure. Then came Thanksgiving when I was 25. It was a cold day in Norfolk, winds from the Chesapeake Bay carrying the salty scent and crisp bite of autumn. My mother, Laura, had prepared a grand feast at the family home, the table draped in white, silk and laden with traditional dishes, roast turkey, creamy mashed sweet potatoes, and fragrant pumpkin pie. She always tried to make holidays like this warm and cozy, a way to bring the family closer, though both she and I knew the cracks between us had grown too deep. As I stepped into the dining room, the familiar aroma of the food sent a pang through my heart. I remembered Thanksgivings when Grandpa was alive. He'd sit at the head of the table, sharing stories of his early days, laughing heartily about the time he burned a batch of ribs because he was too busy chatting with customers. But now Dad sat in his place, dressed in an expensive suit, his gold watch glinting on his wrist. Blake sat beside him, buzzing with excitement like a kid, while Mom busied herself arranging plates, trying to hide her tension behind a strained smile. The atmosphere started out pleasant enough. Mom shared lighthearted stories about Blake's and my childhood, and I tried to laugh along, though my heart felt heavy. Dad and Blake talked about the company, the new Baltimore branch, and plans to expand into North Carolina. I stayed quiet, carving my turkey, trying to suppress the simmering anger inside. I'd learned to hold my tongue over the years, but every word Dad spoke about his business vision felt like a sharp knife to my heart. Then, mid-meal, Dad stood, lightly tapping his wine glass to draw everyone's attention. "I have an important announcement," he said, his voice low but commanding. I looked up, a bad feeling settling deep in my gut. Mom stopped arranging plates, her eyes flickering with worry. Blake grinned, as if he already knew what was coming. I gripped my knife and fork, waiting. "As you know, the Dawson Grill and Oyster Bar is now an empire," Dad began, a smug smile spreading across his face. "And I've been thinking a lot about the future, about who will take over when I'm gone." He paused, scanning the table, his gaze lingering on Blake. My heart raced. I didn't know why, but I felt the ground shifting beneath me. "I've made my decision," Dad continued, his voice ringing like a final verdict. "The entire estate and the restaurant chain will be left to Blake." The room seemed to freeze. My blood turned to ice, as if someone had doused me with frigid water. Mom gasped, her trembling hand setting her glass down with a clatter. Blake beamed, clapping as if he'd just won a grand prize. "Thank you, Dad," he exclaimed, standing to hug him. But I sat there, utterly stunned, feeling my world collapse around me. Dad raised a hand, silencing the room. "Let me explain," he said, his eyes sliding over me, cold and utterly devoid of emotion. "Blake understands my vision. He knows how to do business, how to take the family enterprise to new heights. As for Wyatt," he paused, locking eyes with me, each word a cruel dagger. "Wyatt only knows how to resist. Has no vision, no understanding of business. He clings to Grandpa's outdated ideas, but we're in a new era. I can't entrust this empire to someone who doesn't grasp its value." Felt like a public slap in front of my entire family. Dad's words weren't just a decision, they were a profound betrayal. For 6 long years since Grandpa's death, I'd poured myself into protecting his legacy. I'd worked in the restaurant, voiced ideas, endured Blake's mockery and Dad's contempt, all because I truly believed I could save what Grandpa left behind. And now, Dad wasn't just stripping me of my inheritance, he was dismissing every effort, every single belief I held dear. Mom looked at me, her eyes brimming with tears. "Frank," she said, her voice shaking, "you can't do this to Wyatt. He's your son, too." But Dad just shook his head. "Laura, this is for the family's good. Blake is our future." Blake, still grinning, patted my shoulder as if he were genuinely consoling me.
Ow.
"Don't be upset, Wyatt," he said, his voice sweet but laced with undeniable falseness. "You can still work for the company. You're just not cut out to lead." I looked directly into Blake's eyes, and for the very first time, I saw clearly that he wasn't merely Dad's supporter. He was an active participant in this betrayal. I couldn't take it anymore. I pushed my chair back and stood, the room spinning around me. "Wyatt, sit down," Mom called, her voice thick with worry. But I didn't listen. I simply couldn't stay there. I couldn't sit at the same table with people who had turned their backs on me and on Grandpa. "I don't belong here anymore," I said, my voice calm but cold as ice. I looked at Dad, then Blake, and finally at Mom, who was bravely fighting back tears. "You've chosen your path. I won't walk it with you." I walked out of the dining room, each step tearing at my heart. Outside, the cold wind swept through, carrying dry leaves across the street. Stood in front of the house, looking back at the warm light spilling from the windows, but I knew, with absolute certainty, that I no longer belonged there. I'd tried, fought, and hoped I could save Grandpa's legacy. But now I saw clearly that the family business was no longer his. Dad and Blake had twisted it into something foreign, a cold, soulless machine fueled by greed and arrogance. Moment, I made an unbreakable vow to myself. I wouldn't follow Dad's path, chasing empty numbers or hollow glory. God, I would rebuild from the ground up, the way Grandpa taught me, with heart, with sincerity. With the values he instilled in me, I knew Dad's company would eventually crumble, because anything built on deceit could never last. And I, Wyatt Dawson, would prove it. That night I packed my things and left the house without a word to Dad or Blake. I took nothing but a few clothes, Grandpa's worn notebook, and the determined fire still smoldering in my heart. I had no money, no clear plan, only an ironclad resolve. Why would start over my way? Standing in a tiny rented room in Norfolk, staring at a nearly empty bank account, I realized the road ahead wasn't just treacherous. It was fraught with immense risk. I'd walked away from the family business, my inheritance, and the security I once had, but I had no regrets. I knew I was doing the right thing, even if the cost was steep. I immediately began working to make my dream a reality. A small restaurant rooted in the farm-table philosophy Grandpa lived by. I wanted a place that used organic, traceable ingredients, where customers could truly taste the heart in every dish. But dreaming was easy. Execution was the real challenge. I had no capital, no connections, and worse, I knew Dad and Blake wouldn't leave me alone. I desperately needed a partner, someone who believed in my vision as much as I did. Then, Brittany came to mind. Brittany had been my friend since high school, a girl with golden hair and a smile that genuinely lit up any room. She was an incredibly talented chef, trained at a prestigious culinary school, and working at a small restaurant in Virginia Beach. I remembered the days we'd sit together in class, daydreaming about opening our own place. "Wyatt, if you ever do it, I'll be right there in the kitchen," she'd said, half joking. I called her, unsure if she'd even remember that promise. When I shared my idea, Brittany didn't hesitate for a second. "Wyatt, I believe in you," she said over the phone, her voice brimming with excitement. "Let's do this. I'm in." Brittany brought not just her exceptional culinary skills, but also the unwavering faith I so desperately needed. We immediately started planning a small restaurant in Norfolk, which we named Arthur's Legacy Steakhouse to honor Grandpa. With a bank loan and Brittany's modest savings, we rented a small storefront in the old neighborhood, the very heart of my childhood memories with Grandpa. Starting a business is never easy, and we faced countless challenges from the outset. With limited funds, we could only afford basic equipment and a few months' rent. I reached out to local farmers who'd worked with Grandpa, but many were hesitant. "Wyatt, we love you," said Joe, the sweet potato farmer, "but your dad made things really hard for us. Doesn't want us working with you." I wasn't surprised. Dad and Blake, with their vast network, did everything in their power to obstruct me. They persuaded major suppliers to avoid us, spreading damaging rumors that my restaurant would fail. Some days I stood in the empty kitchen of Arthur's Legacy, staring at nearly bare shelves, genuinely wondering if I was on the wrong path. But Brittany was always there, a shining beacon in my darkest moments. She wasn't just a chef, she was a true partner who constantly reminded me why we started. "Wyatt, we're doing the right thing," she said one evening, as we sat on the restaurant floor surrounded by freshly delivered crates. "Your Grandpa would be so proud." I looked into her eyes, saw her unwavering determination, and knew I absolutely couldn't give up. My mother, Laura, became my biggest supporter. She'd visit Arthur's Legacy on her days off, bringing homemade cookies or helping us clean tables. "You're doing what your grandpa always wanted," she said, her eyes glistening. She never explicitly said it, but I knew she was heartbroken by the deepening family divide. Dad and Blake acted as if I didn't even exist, yet Mom somehow found a way to stay close to me, even if she couldn't change them. Slowly, Arthur's Legacy began to draw customers. We worked tirelessly at the front, Brittany in the kitchen crafting dishes that truly echoed Grandpa's era: perfectly grilled steaks, salads with fresh local produce, and fragrant toasted bread. Customers came out of curiosity, but they stayed for the unparalleled quality. "This is the best ribs I've ever had," one exclaimed, warming my heart. Each compliment was another brick in our slowly building reputation. Regulars returned, bringing friends, and soon our little restaurant was packed on weekends. But it wasn't always smooth sailing. Some nights I lay awake worrying about unpaid loans and Dad and Blake's relentless interference. A Chesapeake Bay fish supplier abruptly canceled our contract, admitting Dad had pressured them. "I'm sorry, Wyatt," he said. "Frank's a big player." I gripped the phone, wanting to scream, but I just nodded and found another way. Brittany and I drove 4 hours to meet new suppliers, winning them over with our sincerity and promises of long-term partnerships. Slowly, we built a small but incredibly reliable network of farmers and fishermen who stood by us. By the time I was 27, Arthur's Legacy was standing strong. We not only paid down some of our debt, but also turned a healthy profit. Brittany and I grew closer than ever. One evening after closing, we sat on the restaurant steps, sharing a beer and watching the streetlights flicker. "Wyatt," Brittany said. "Softly, you did it." "We did it." I looked at her, and in that moment, I knew she wasn't just a colleague, but my partner in life. I took her hand, and soon after I proposed. Brittany said yes, her smile as bright as the sun. Our wedding was on a warm spring day in a small Norfolk garden, simple, adorned with wildflowers and rustic wooden chairs. Mom attended, wearing a pale blue dress, hugging me tightly and saying, "Your grandpa would be so proud, Wyatt." Dad and Blake didn't show. I wasn't surprised, but it still stung. Brittany held my hand, whispering, "We're each other's family, Wyatt." And looking into her eyes, I knew she was absolutely right. Her family, our friends, and Mom made the day beautiful, though Dad and Blake's absence lingered like a small thorn in my heart. By 29, Arthur's Legacy was a Norfolk staple, with steady customers and glowing reviews on Yelp and in local papers. We paid off most of our debts and began planning a second location. I wanted to bring Grandpa's philosophy to more people, to prove that doing business with heart wasn't just a dream, but a tangible reality. Brittany and I scouted new spaces, discussed menus, and dreamed of a bigger future, always staying true to Grandpa's values. I knew challenges lay ahead. Dad and Blake remained a threat, and I couldn't predict their next move to undermine me. But every day as I walked into Arthur's Legacy, saw Grandpa's photo on the wall, and heard customers' laughter, I felt I was on the right path. I wasn't just building a restaurant, I was building a legacy. It's Grandpa's true legacy, not the one Dad and Blake had destroyed. And I knew no matter what happened, I would never give up. In the years that followed, Arthur's Legacy Steakhouse became a small but shining beacon in Norfolk. Customers didn't just come to eat, they came for an experience. To feel the genuine sincerity in every dish, from perfectly grilled steaks to salads made with vegetables picked that very morning. But as Brittany and I poured ourselves into building our dream, whispers started reaching me about Dad's company. The Dawson Grill and Oyster Bar, once Grandpa's pride, was faltering. Customers began complaining about the food: rubbery steaks, off-tasting seafood, and bland salads that completely lacked soul. "I've eaten here since Arthur's days," a regular told Mom, his voice heavy with disappointment. "It's just not the same anymore." Mom relayed the story to me, and I nodded, unsurprised. I'd seen this coming the day Dad chose to source frozen food from nameless suppliers. Rumors spread not just in the community but across food forums and social media. Yelp reviews consistently called the chain's dishes cheap and heartless. Then one day Mom called, her voice trembling with worry. "Wyatt, there's talk that the press is investigating your father's food sources," she said. "They're saying something shady about the seafood imported from China." I stayed silent, unsure how to respond. Part of me wanted to say Dad deserved it, that he dug his own grave by abandoning Grandpa's values. But another part, the small piece that still cared for my family, ached. I didn't want Dad and Blake to crash, not entirely. Yet, I knew they were on a path with no way out. Meanwhile, Arthur's legacy flourished. One morning, as I checked ingredients, in the kitchen, a familiar face walked in. It was Henry, the head chef, who'd worked with Grandpa from the start. He stood there in a worn jacket, his eyes tired, but still warm with sincerity. "Wyatt," he said, his voice low. "I can't stay with your dad's company anymore. What he's doing, it's not what Arthur taught us." I looked at him, a wave of warmth spreading through me. "Want to work with me?" asked almost instantly. Henry smiled and nodded. "I've been waiting for you to ask." Henry wasn't the only one. Other former employees of Grandpa's, Maria, the dishwasher, and Tom, who used to run the bar, started showing up at Arthur's legacy. They said they couldn't stand how Dad ran things, that they missed the days working with Grandpa when everyone was treated like family. "You're like Arthur, Wyatt," Maria said, one night as we cleaned up after closing. "You've got his heart." Those words truly fueled me, strengthening my resolve to expand our dream. At 30, Brittany and I opened the second Arthur's Legacy in Virginia Beach. It was a bold move. Funded by the first restaurant's slim profits and a new loan. But we'd prepared meticulously. From choosing a prime seaside location to signing contracts with trusted local farmers and fishermen, on opening day, I stood outside, watching a long line of customers, filled with indescribable pride. Brittany stood beside me, holding my hand, whispering, "We did it, Wyatt." I looked at her, her smile radiant as sunlight, and knew I had not just a business partner, but an irreplaceable companion for life. The second restaurant quickly thrived. Customers absolutely loved the cozy atmosphere. It's a simple, yet incredibly high-quality menu. And the inspiring story behind Arthur's legacy, young man's quest to preserve his grandfather's values. Yelp and TripAdvisor reviews overflowed. With praise, "This place feels like home," one wrote. The food isn't just delicious, it has soul. Each compliment was another brick in our growing reputation, and I knew Grandpa was smiling from somewhere above. A year later, at 31, we opened 2 more locations, one in Chesapeake and one in Richmond. With each new branch, I carefully hung Grandpa's photo in the dining room, a constant reminder of why we started. Brittany and I worked tirelessly, from personally inspecting ingredients to meticulously training staff, ensuring every restaurant embodied Grandpa's spirit, sincerity, quality, and warmth. Some nights, exhausted, I'd sit in the original restaurant's small office, staring at Grandpa's notebook, wondering if I was truly doing enough. But then, I'd recall his profound words, "Do business with your heart, Wyatt," and I knew I was on the right path. As Arthur's legacy grew, Dad's company plunged into an escalating crisis. Mom would visit, sharing updates over coffee after. "Closing. They're panicking," she said once. "The press is digging deeper into the food sourcing, and customers are really leaving." She said Dad hired a PR team to try and quash the rumors, but it only made things worse. A Norfolk Chronicle article publicly questioned the chain's transparency, and customers began boycotting. Blake, with his usual blind confidence, insisted it was just a misunderstanding. But I knew the truth. Dad and Blake had built their empire on deceit, and now it was inevitably crumbling. Mom looked at me, her eyes gleaming with pride and a touch of sadness. "You've done what your father couldn't, Wyatt," she said, squeezing my hand. "You've kept your grandpa's heart alive." I smiled, but a subtle void lingered. I didn't want Dad and Blake to completely fail. Not exactly. But they'd chosen their path, and I couldn't save them. I could only keep building Arthur's legacy, not just for myself, but for Grandpa, for Mom, and for those who believed in me. Each evening, as I locked the restaurant and watched the streetlights flicker, a strange peace settled over me. I was confronting Dad and Blake, not with hatred, but by simply living true to my beliefs. Arthur's legacy wasn't just a restaurant chain. It was proof that doing business with heart is never outdated. And I knew whatever the future held, I'd keep fighting. Not to prove Dad wrong, but to prove Grandpa right. One early summer morning when I was 32, as I checked ingredients at the Norfolk restaurant, Brittany walked in holding a local newspaper, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Wyatt, you need to read this," she said, her voice brimming with enthusiasm. She handed me the Virginia Times. The headline on the food section made my heart race. Arthur's Legacy and the Dawson Grill. An oyster bar. 2 paths, 1 legacy. The article was written by Eleanor Price, a renowned food critic whose words could either make or break a restaurant. I took the paper, my hands trembling, unsure if this was good or bad news. I sat at the bar, reading each line with my heart pounding. Eleanor wrote about the Dawson Grill and Oyster Bar with unflinching honesty. She described how the food quality had plummeted: tough steaks, foul-smelling seafood, and service as cold as the frozen ingredients they used. She openly questioned their sourcing, mentioning persistent rumors of low-quality imports from China and unknown suppliers. "Customers have lost trust," she wrote. "And it's no surprise when a legacy built on sincerity has been reduced to a money-making machine." Then she turned her attention to Arthur's legacy. Reading those words, I felt my heart swell with pride. Wyatt Dawson, Arthur Dawson's grandson, has truly brought his grandfather's spirit back to life, she wrote. Arthur's legacy. Steakhouse is a testament to doing business with heart. Fresh ingredients from local farmers, transparent sourcing, and a warm atmosphere that feels like dining at home. Wyatt has revived his grandfather's legacy not by chasing profits, but by honoring the values that once made the Dawson Grill and Oyster Bar a beloved name. I folded the paper, a mix of emotions surging within me. Pride, gratitude, but also a pang of sorrow. Eleanor's article didn't just praise us. It drew a stark, undeniable contrast between Arthur's legacy and Dad's company. It was a clear declaration that I'd been right, that Grandpa's path was the truly sustainable one. Brittany hugged me, her smile radiant. "We did it, Wyatt," she said. "This is a game changer." And it was. Eleanor's article spread like wildfire. Social media buzzed with comments from Grandpa's old customers and newcomers alike, all discovering Arthur's legacy. They shared. The article posted photos of our dishes and praised the sincerity evident in every detail. Customers flocked to all 3 of our locations, Norfolk, Virginia Beach, and Richmond. Some days, we had to turn people away for lack of tables, and I hired more staff to keep up. Henry, now head chef at the Norfolk branch, laughed heartily at the crowds. "See this, Wyatt? You'd say this is what Arthur always wanted?" Meanwhile, the Dawson Grill and Oyster Bar's sales plummeted. Mom said Dad and Blake had to close the Chesapeake branch due to dwindling customers. Rumors about poor food quality continued to spread like wildfire, and then the worst happened. A group of customers claimed they got sick after eating at the Newport News branch. They posted online, describing nausea and stomach pain, demanding answers. Some even banded together to file a lawsuit, accusing the chain of using unsafe, low-quality ingredients. I heard all of this from Mom, and though I didn't want Dad and Blake to crash, I couldn't deny they'd brought this on themselves. Each day, Arthur's legacy welcomed more customers while the Dawson Grill and Oyster Bar lost its shine. I knew Eleanor's article was just the spark. The truth about Dad's practices had simply exposed itself, but I didn't feel triumphant. Instead, a vague sadness lingered. I'd once hoped to save the family business, but now I knew it had strayed too far from Grandpa's path. The collapse of the Dawson Grill and Oyster Bar came faster than I expected. Not long after Eleanor's article, the Virginia Food Safety Agency launched a full investigation. They inspected the chain's remaining locations, and what they found shocked even me: substandard ingredients, falsified documents about food origins, and even serious sanitation violations in the kitchens. A public report revealed that much. Of the seafood imported from China, failed safety standards, with some certifications even forged to pass inspections. I read the report online, torn between anger and profound heartache. This was the company Grandpa spent his life building, now completely tarnished by Dad's relentless greed. The consequences hit like a storm. The Food Safety Agency immediately revoked the operating licenses of the Baltimore and Richmond branches. Customers boycotted in droves, refusing to step foot in the remaining locations. Shareholders who once praised Dad's vision fled, pulling their investments as quickly as they'd poured them in. Articles kept coming, each one a final, crushing blow to Dad's empire. From legacy to disaster, one headline grimly read. I read it with a heavy heart. I didn't want this to happen, but I knew I couldn't stop it. Meanwhile, Arthur's legacy soared. Investors started reaching out, eagerly offering capital to open even more locations. You've got a sustainable model, Wyatt once said during a meeting at the Norfolk restaurant. The market craves brands like yours. Quality. Ethical, with a compelling story. I listened, but remained cautious. I didn't want Arthur's legacy to become a soulless machine like Dad's company. I agreed to meetings, but always stressed that any expansion had to stay true to Grandpa's beloved farm-to-table philosophy. Amidst the chaos, I received a call from Dad. I was in the Virginia Beach restaurant's kitchen, was checking a fresh batch of fish, when my phone buzzed. Seeing his name, I hesitated. I didn't want to hear from him, but curiosity ultimately won out. Wyatt. His voice came through, hoarse and laced with raw anger. What have you done? You've destroyed this family. I was stunned, unable to believe what I'd just heard. What are you talking about? I replied, trying to stay calm. You turned the press against us? He shouted. You built that restaurant to compete, to prove me wrong? You betrayed the family. I gripped the phone, my blood boiling. Dad, I said, my voice icy. You betrayed Grandpa. I'm just doing what he taught me. I hung up, my heart pounding, but I knew I wasn't wrong. A few days later, Blake called, his voice trembling, stripped completely of his old confidence. Wyatt, you have to help us, he said, almost pleading. The company's collapsing. Dad doesn't know what to do, and I can't handle it. I stayed silent, letting him continue. You know how to fix this, Wyatt? You can save the company, please? I heard the sheer panic in his voice, and for the first time I saw his true incompetence clearly. All those years of fawning over Dad, all that arrogance now reduced to desperate begging. Blake, I said evenly, I tried to save the company long ago. You didn't listen. It's too late now. I hung up, feeling a strange sense of relief. I was no longer responsible for them. Addio. Arthur's legacy kept growing, but I didn't let success blind me. Brittany and I worked tirelessly to ensure every location maintained Grandpa's unwavering quality and spirit. Mom, witnessing both Dad's downfall and my rising success, often said, "You're my pride, Wyatt." I knew she was still heartbroken over the family's fracture, but she saw I'd kept my promise to Grandpa. I wasn't fighting to tear down Dad or Blake, but to prove that doing business with heart was the right path, the path Grandpa walked, and the one I'd continue. A few months after Blake's call, as I was busy preparing for a packed evening at the Norfolk branch, Mom called. "Wyatt," she said, her voice trembling. "Your father and Blake want to meet you." I froze, the knife in my hand, still mid-chop, a chill running down my spine. I didn't want to see them, not after everything, but Mom pleaded. "They're desperate, Wyatt. Just meet them once, please." I sighed, knowing I couldn't refuse her. "Fine," I said, "but I'm not promising anything." The meeting took place on a drizzly afternoon at a small coffee shop in downtown Norfolk. I walked in and saw Dad and Blake in the corner, a stark contrast to their days of arrogance. Dad, once always in tailored suits and a gleaming gold watch, now wore a worn sweater, his face haggard, eyes sunken. Blake sat beside him, hair disheveled, actively avoiding my gaze. I sat across from them, silent, waiting for them to speak. "Wyatt," Dad began, his voice stripped of its old smugness. "The company's on the brink of bankruptcy. We've lost most of our locations. Shareholders don't trust us anymore, and the lawsuits, they're killing us." He paused, looking at me as if expecting a reaction. I stayed silent, my hands clasped tightly under the table. Blake jumped in, his voice almost pleading. "Wyatt, you can help us. Arthur's legacy is thriving. You could buy the company or loan us enough to recover. This is the family legacy. You can't let it collapse. I looked at Blake, seeing desperation in his eyes, but also a profound emptiness. He didn't understand or refuse to that Grandpa's true legacy had died long ago, the day Dad chose profits over heart. I took a deep breath, meeting Dad's eyes, then Blake's. "That's not Grandpa's legacy anymore," I said, my voice cold but steady. "You destroyed it. You chose your path, and this is the consequence." Dad's brow furrowed, as if he couldn't believe my words. "Wyatt, you're my son," he said, his voice shaking with anger and desperation. "You can't turn your back on family like this." "Family?" I repeated, feeling the simmering anger flare. "You turned your back on me the day you chose Blake as heir. You turned your back on Grandpa the day you bought cheap ingredients for profit. Don't talk to me about family." I stood, my heart heavy, yet oddly relieved. "I can't help you. Not because I don't want to, but because I can't save something that's already dead." Blake broke down, sobbing, but I didn't look back. I walked out of the coffee shop, the cold rain hitting my face, but I felt as if a monumental weight had lifted. I'd held my ground, not out of hatred, but because I couldn't live in the shadow of a family that betrayed its own values. Back at Arthur's legacy, Brittany was waiting at the door. She didn't ask questions, just hugged me, and in her embrace, I knew I'd made the right choice. A year later, the Dawson Grill and Oyster Bar officially declared bankruptcy. News spread across papers from the Norfolk Chronicle to the Virginia Times. "Restaurant empire falls to greed," one headline read. Dad and Blake were drowning in debt. They were forced to sell their once prized luxuries. The Outer Banks vacation. Home, the lavish yacht, the sleek sports cars. Mom said Dad now lived in a small apartment on the outskirts, while Blake took odd jobs to get by. I listened without feeling triumphant, only a vague sadness. They were my family, however distant, and I never wanted to see them in this state. But I knew they'd chosen their path. Mom, unwilling to live in Dad's shadow any longer, moved in with Brittany and me. We had a daughter, Emma, and Mom became a truly wonderful grandmother, always telling Emma about her great-grandfather Arthur and the golden days of the Dawson Grill and Oyster Bar. "Your great-grandpa was a remarkable man," she'd say, stroking Emma's hair, "and your dad is carrying on his legacy." Those words warmed my heart. I wasn't doing this just for Grandpa, but for Mom, Brittany, and Emma, my true family. Arthur's legacy kept growing, but Brittany and I stayed vigilant. We opened 2 more locations, one in D.C. and one in Raleigh, always ensuring each remained. True to Grandpa's farm-toteable philosophy, I still visited farmers markets myself, shaking hands with growers, listening to their stories about crops and families. I wanted Arthur's legacy to be more than just a restaurant chain, a community, where customers and staff truly felt at home. In every location, I hung a photo of Grandpa standing proudly in front of the original Dawson Grill and Oyster Bar, his smile radiant, his eyes full of resolve. It was a powerful symbol of the true legacy, not money or fame, but unwavering sincerity and integrity. One evening, as I stood in the Norfolk branch's kitchen, watching customers laugh and talk outside, I felt a rare moment of profound peace. Brittany came up, placing a hand on my shoulder. "You okay, Wyatt?" she asked softly. I smiled, glancing at Grandpa's photo on the wall. "I'm good," I said. "I was just thinking." I kept my promise to Grandpa. My smile wasn't about outdoing Dad or Blake, or about Arthur's legacy thriving while the Dawson Grill and Oyster Bar crumbled. It was a smile of pure liberation, freedom from a toxic family, from values I was once pressured to follow. I'd found my path not just to prove Grandpa right, but to live true to myself. And as I looked out, seeing the streetlights glimmer and hearing the joyous laughter from the dining room, I knew Grandpa's legacy would live on, not just in Arthur's legacy, but deeply in my heart and in the generations to come.